later in my presentation, so you'll have to stay on edge. One of the interesting aspects that impressed me yesterday was we took the bus to and from lunch. And this very attractive young lady stood up. I thought she wanted to meet me, but I subsequently learned that she was giving me her seat because I was a senior citizen. That doesn't happen in the United States. They'll run over you first. My daughter is one to do that. She'll say the old people are in the way, they need to move. All right, let me give you a little bit about my background so that you'll understand my perspective on this somewhat troublesome issue. I've been at this business for some over 20 years. The most recent experience I had in the government, although I'm now in the private sector for a number of months, I was the Director of Global Cybersecurity Management in the Department of Homeland Security. Now, those of you who are familiar with Washington, the longer the title you have, the less important you are. President is one word. So if you have a short title in Washington, you have a lot more influence. But I did have a tremendous challenge with the 30 young individuals that were in my supervisory chain. Over half of them had a master's degree, and over half of the 30 that were in my group were under the age of 30. Now, what that basically means is I was old enough to be their father. The plus was that it gave me renewed confidence in the follow-on generations, because heretofore I had assumed that the follow-on generations were like my children, which are a challenge. But these young folks taught me a lot. And one of the things they taught me was the aspect of you have to be ready for change. You have to embrace change. You cannot be resistant to change. Indeed, they illustrated the old philosophy associated with evolution. Survival of the fittest does not go to the strongest, the smartest, or the fastest, but the one who can adapt to change. And I'm very gratified to see that you are adapting to change in the new world order. The internet has provided the capability now for over 2 billion people in the world to be connected with each other, with information, with commerce, and sharing technology. Now, let me share a couple of more stories to illustrate the concept of risk management. Most of your senior officials, just like in the U.S. government and elsewhere, private sector also, are resistant to change. They are not interested in risk management. They're more focused on risk ignorance. Let's pretend there's not a problem. If there's no problem, then we don't have to do anything. And the second leg is risk avoidance. If we don't recognize there's a problem and we don't do anything about it, we can't be blamed for doing something wrong. And how many of you have experienced that philosophy in your leadership? You don't have to answer that question. I know the answer already. Back in 1997, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is a senior military leader in the U.S. government, challenged us by saying, information warfare is an interesting concept, but it will only work in a laboratory environment. There's really no need to be that worried about information security because it is not real. That illustrates risk of ignorance. So I led a team of 18 people in hacking in. I'm a trained hacker. I'm not any good anymore. I used to be okay, but I'm not any good anymore at that. We hacked into a senior military command in Asia, U.S., and brought them to the point where they could not control their military forces. So a 4-star general had to tell the president that he could not fight. And when the president asked, and this was Bill Clinton, when the president asked him why he could not fight, he said the answer is very simple. I do not have the ability to communicate. I do not have the ability to communicate. Telling the president that you're ineffective does not help your upward mobility. My point in telling you this story is that in order to affect change in risk management, you have to go to the very top. You have to get the senior leaders' attention so that they understand how important this issue is. You gave a great presentation, Rick, on the issue associated with computer security. And please take to heart everything you said, because that is critically important. You have gone through a massive change, all of us collectively, over the last 20 years. There's been massive political change in the world, massive economic change in the world, change in economic systems. Some countries and some individuals and some groups of individuals have been resistant to modernity, trying to ignore it, trying to say it's not real. And all of this has been brought about by technology. And the technology has produced the opportunity for information sharing. But as we learned earlier this morning, sharing information and having access to information is a double-edged sword. It helps us understand, it helps expand knowledge, it helps us to communicate, it helps us to produce goods and services and make a stronger economy and a stronger nation. But at the same time, we are exposed to risks. That is a reality, and that's what we need to deal with. And that's why risk management is so important. I've outlined on the next slide the 7 habits of effective aspirations associated with risk management. And the first aspect of that is to understand your role. You have to be a change agent. You have to be an advocate to make sure your leadership and your followership, you've got to lead up, you've got to lead down, to make sure they understand that there's a changed environment, that you need to manage the risk, not close your eyes to it, or pretend that it doesn't happen. That requires collaboration. You need to work closely with all of your colleagues, whether they are your boss, whether they're your contemporaries, or whether they are your subordinates. You have to think ambitiously, think outside of the box, as they say, color outside of the lines, because what you're trying to do is something that others have not done before. But you will be successful if you follow these guidelines. You have to have a good, positive attitude the whole time, because you are projecting the need for change. If you sound depressed, then others are going to be depressed, and they're not going to want to follow your lead. Now here's the one that's really a lot of fun. You have to be flexible. You have to be sensitive to the fact that some people are going to adopt your programs quickly, and others are going to be resistant. So it's going to challenge your management and your leadership style to help produce the desired results. You got to be optimistic. I mentioned this twice because that's extremely important. If you are not confident in your ability to lead, then those who follow you are reluctant to come behind you. Be a positive agent of change. And by that I mean successfully communicate your goals. Identify what the end state is. Don't just wander around. And the example that I frequently use in college lectures is associated with an old sailor. And no, I wasn't part of his original crew, as my children sometimes say. There were 3 ships that left Portugal: the Pinta, the Nina, the Santa Maria. And they were led by Christopher Columbus. This was not just a weekend sailing crew. They didn't load up and just go see where the wind would take them. They had an objective. That objective was to find the East Indies. Now, they did not succeed in finding the East Indies, but they were flexible enough to realize that what they did find was perhaps more important in the East Indies, because it opened up a whole new world to trade, to commerce, to information, to intellectual challenges. So you have to be flexible in your goal, but you do have to have a goal and know where that is. Now, we'll go to the next slide. How do we do that? That was fast. That's impressive. All right. What I've done in the next few slides, and I apologize for the small type, but I'll tell you where you can get this and pay close attention to it. This is a document that was published by the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. And this is the blueprint that the government uses to implement risk management. And it's very difficult and different to do risk management in the information technology field than it is in the normal business field. If you talk to a banker or someone who manufactures goods, they will give you a different example of what risk management means to them as opposed to an IT manager. And the IT manager, the information technology manager's job of risk management is much more challenging because of the diversity of the assets that you're trying to manage. It's not just desktops. It's not just laptops. It's what I refer to as BYOD, which is bring your own device. I mentioned the 30 young folks that work for me. None of them wanted to use a desktop. I'm an old guy. I embrace the desktop. I think it's a wonderful invention. Now, okay, how about a laptop? No, boss, don't want to use a laptop. Too cumbersome, too big, too heavy, too old school. They want to use iPhones. They want to use Android. So my challenge was to come up with a security solution so that they could comfortably use those devices. They were comfortable. I wanted to be comfortable. And at first I said, no, you can't do it. Everyone who's involved in information technology security, their first answer is always no. Just like talking to lawyers, they always say no at first. I'm different. I always say it depends. But they responded and said, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security uses an Android. Why can't I? That's a good question. If I can accommodate the big boss, I should be able to accommodate those who are very productive. And so we worked that out. And one of the ways we worked that out was to have them go through a common gateway rather than a shared gateway like Gmail, which is owned by Google. So if you're moving your stuff to Google, you're sharing it with a lot of people that you don't necessarily want to share it with. But if you have a common gateway, which we are working very diligently in the United States to reduce our government gateways from 18 to 5, so that we stand a better chance of maintaining the security of those gateways. So the documentation, which is summarized here, is about 90 pages long. So I've asked that these slides be made available to you electronically. So they are to ask you, and you'll send it to them. And if you really want to do a lot of bedtime reading, then download the 90 pages from NIST. It was part of my team that helped develop these processes. I'm very proud of it. But they do go into a tremendous amount of detail, and it will take you some time to absorb them. And I'm not going to try to teach a course in this today in the limited amount of time that I have. Now, I think this is pretty much it on the NIST part. All right. This is the real challenge, supply chain risk management. How many of you use software that is developed outside of your country? We all do, even the United States. Microsoft, great operating system. Apple, great operating systems. But they are developed 24 hours a day, all around the world, to include places like China, who have an opportunity to add undocumented features to the code. So whenever you buy things, you have to remember a number of points. It wasn't made in the cleanest environment in terms of security considerations. Even sequentially produced laptops are each individually different because of the components, because of different suppliers. And every supplier that has an opportunity to add a component also has an opportunity to add an undocumented feature. Let me give you a few examples. About 6 years ago, one of the most popular gifts to give kids and adults was this little electronic device that you plugged into your computer, and it would go into your computer and take all of your pictures and randomly display them. Everyone loved it. But the downside of that particular device was that it had a phone home capability. And we're not talking E2 or ET. We're talking a country that has 5 letters and starts with C and is not in South America. How many of you have Androids? A number of you do. How many of you use Angry Birds? A number of you like that. Who produced Angry Birds? A guy in Finland. Do you know him? Do you trust him? Has anybody evaluated that application? No. That's an easy way to introduce an undocumented feature. If I were still competent enough to be very nefarious, I would develop an application, and I would make sure that that application was verified by every government entity, so that you would know as a consumer that that application is perfectly safe to use, and everyone would relax and feel good. And then I would give you an update that has not been evaluated, and I would have you. And when we stop and think that the Androids and the iPhones that we use today have more computing power than NASA had at its disposal when they put a person on the moon, that's a pretty powerful instrument. We all use that. A couple other examples, and then I'll step down. Cisco is very famous for its routers. The Department of Defense in the United States government is very famous for using a lot of those routers. As a matter of fact, our communication systems depends on the efficacy of those routers. Several years ago, we bought 10 routers, put them in place, and everybody was happy. And all 10 of those routers failed prematurely. A coincidence? Were they designed to fail early? Were they designed to fail all at the same time at a critical point? Another example. A fighter airplane. A bunch of F-15s were leaving Hawaii, flying to Japan. Midway point where they were to meet their tanker for refueling, their computer systems failed. Coincidence? Or a designed-in flaw? Now, obviously, since I'm telling you the story, the airplanes were recovered and there was no damage. But can you imagine the crew confidence, or the lack of crew confidence, when you're flying along and all of a sudden there's a little sign that says, reboot your computer. Kind of scary when you're in the air. 2 more examples, and then I'll sit down. The opportunity to build follow-on routers for Cisco does not exist in the United States. The technological capability no longer exists in the United States. The routers were designed in the United States, and in an effort to make things a little quicker for us, the Chinese took a copy of those details and came to us and said, we can build the routers because A, we have the technology, B, we have the plans, and C, we can do it cheaper than anyone else. And they've done that. Every computer, every communication device that we use has an integrated circuit. All of the integrated circuits are built overseas. How many of us have confidence that those integrated circuits have not been modified? None of us do. I mean, the best stuff is made overseas in that regard. So we have to be very careful about what we use and test it, and be willing to pay a little bit more for that opportunity. And then the last example I'll give is designing software. I talked earlier about software and how important it is to make sure it is pristine, that you know where the software was made and what happened to it along the way. It's like food. You want to make sure that the food that is served to you is properly prepared, it's clean, it comes from an acceptable source. Same thing with software. Now here's the interesting challenge. Software produced by Microsoft and Oracle and others of that magnitude has become increasingly robust because they were tired of the black eyes they were given by virtue of the fact that it was so vulnerable. The problem are the special applications that are used in the banking sector and in other business sectors and even in the government sector that have not necessarily been built to those same security standards. So one of the programs that I led when I was in the Department of Homeland Security was to convince Microsoft and Oracle to make the technology available on designing secure software available to application designers and vendors. And I encourage you to take advantage of that. You and I have a special arrangement to help work that out. This concludes my scheduled portion of the presentation. I'll leave you with a long homework assignment of reading 800 pages of NIST documentation, which is absolutely brilliant. And I think after you read that, you'll appreciate the fact that I only gave you a summary. Thank you very much for your attention.
This is some input based on my experience over the last 5 years working in our home office in the UK, in central government, where I was Director of Security for passports and the registration of births, marriages and deaths in our country. And we moved many of those services online during that period and increased our use of the databases that sit behind those services. One of the things I'll talk about in 2 sessions this morning is not so much focus on denial of service attacks, malware, antivirus, all those classic things, because I'm sure you will have good approaches to that, good defences for that. I'm much more driven by the damage that criminals, terrorists and people like that can do when they sit inside your system for a prolonged period and they work in such a way that you don't even suspect they're there, but they are corrupting the integrity of the staff and the system and achieving effects that you don't want to happen. So let's look at some of that. So, public sector IT outsourcing, the UK has 30 years or more experience of it. We do this in many aspects of public service, not just IT. We've delivered cost savings, new capabilities, innovation, all kinds of things this way. But it has lots of problems. Because the contracts are very long, we have problems there, and it's also difficult in high security environments. We're going. Right, cool. So why does cybersecurity in this context matter so much? Well, it matters so much because it's a demonstration of national capability. So many people will judge the capability of your country, its integrity, its ability to do things by the problems it has. So we'd see cybersecurity sitting on the same level as the terrible troubles we had in London just over a year ago with the riots. It was very important to us to stop that happening again and to get on top of the reasons for it and make sure that people could travel safely in the country, would visit London, would feel safe in our streets and so on. It's the same for us as things like the Falklands. The Falklands are part of our country, and if we have to project naval force to defend our citizens over there, we'll do it. It's all to do with national prestige, and we see cybersecurity in the same place as that. It's that important to us. One of the problems you'll all encounter in this space is what I call the Hollywood effect. No disrespect to my American colleague here, it can be very entertaining, very beneficial. The problem is in the cybersecurity space, many of the leaders you will deal with, ministers, heads of agencies, heads of departments, their views will have been formed from watching movies, from seeing Lisbeth Salander and the girl with the dragon tattoo. That's what they think hacking is about. That's what they think people do. Now, some of it's true, some of it's not true, some of it's more difficult, some of it's less difficult, but you will have to deal with that. Because I think the one key message for today is the most important dialogue is the dialogue between a specialist and a leader. Because the leader's got to express a risk appetite and then you've got to deliver it. But that conversation is so, so difficult. My own experience here comes from, as I say, running security in the passport service in the UK, registration of births, marriages and deaths, and the establishment of a national ID card. Change of government stopped that project, but we got an awful long way with it before it happened. We lived through a time when a major newspaper was hacking civil servants' phones for their voicemails, hacking celebrities' voicemails, pulling out all kinds of secret knowledge and so on and so on. Let me give you an idea of how difficult this is, because it depends critically on the motivation of the attackers. So one of my personal success factors in the passport agency was the black market value of a UK passport. So if I could get you a passport, a real one, how much would you pay me? And in 2 years, we drove that up from €15,000 to €50,000. Now that's a strange success factor, but getting that value up is actually, it's a good thing. So, what's the scope of information security risk management in this space? It is the classic confidentiality, integrity, availability, but increasingly privacy in recent years. We work on a thing called a harm matrix, and I've given this to some of your colleagues so you can see it, because I think unless you have a very good classification system for the value of assets in this space that works across the whole of government, you will find this very difficult to do in a consistent basis. So take a look at that, take a look at the classification systems, and I would recommend you to try and develop together the same sort of thing. We had to change ours over the last few years because we didn't recognise aggregation as a problem. So aggregation is about, if I have 10 records, that's a particular problem, it's a privacy issue, we are sensitive to that. But surely as I go 1,000, 10,000, 10 million records, even though each record is of the same sensitivity, the collection has to be bigger. And in fact, we adopted what we call the $1 rule, which is if each record's worth $1, as you aggregate them up, they become worth more and more and more, and eventually the classification has to go up, just because you have so many records. We'll talk about this in more detail later. So, here's a kind of risk management example. I was a director of a company in the southeast of England that ran the police national computer as a supplier. We actually ran the dark side, the recovery side, the backup side. We were in a very ordinary industrial park, and I used to say as we looked at the risks, what are these tanks at the back of our car park? And people would say, oh, it's just, there's a fuel storage depot, it's nothing, don't worry about it. And I said, what's in the tanks? And they'd say, it's the jet fuel for Heathrow. And because that's a strategic asset, there are many, many, many millions of litres of jet fuel. But the tanks are all explosion proof, and it's a huge risk that's well managed. So it's a 1 in 250 year event. But actually, at 7 AM one Sunday morning, it exploded. And it was the largest peacetime explosion in Europe. It burned for a week and utterly destroyed our building and data centre completely. And I think it's symptomatic for me of trying to explain that risk beforehand to general managers. They saw it as an impossible event. 1 in 250 years. Well, it'll never happen in my lifetime. That's not what a risk like that means. We saw over the last few years many large-scale data losses in UK government departments, and I think that changed people's view of risk appetite. Our tax department, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, lost 3 DVDs that had 25 million child records on them for all the children who received government benefits and who were in close contact with the government. So a vulnerable group in many ways. You have to ask, why was there a command that allowed that entire database to be burned onto DVDs? That is so dangerous. To allow them to be burned and then lose them is inconceivably bad. And it led to a huge tightening up across the whole of government as our records are created, moved and destroyed. The consequences, the chief executive of that agency was fired the following day, even though he was a lifetime civil servant, and the entire board left or was moved in the next few months. So these things do have real consequences. We defined after those events some key roles, and these may be useful to you in working out your dialogues with various departments. The first thing we said is every agency and department, every unit of government must have something called a CIRO. That's not a new person, it's an existing person, but it is the senior information risk owner. That person must be on the board of that agency or department, so they must be senior, they must be talking to the chief executive directly, and they are personally responsible for all information assets in that unit or agency or department. This is not a popular role, I have to say. People run for miles not to be appointed to this role, because what comes with it is a whole cascade of accountabilities and responsibilities. But that's good, because it's better these things are done consciously than ignored or avoided or declined. Departmental security officer, that's the expert that helps the CIRO do that job. What the CIRO usually does in the first week is say, I can't do this on my own. How many assets have we got? Who's responsible for them in my department, in my organisation? And they steadily appoint information asset owners at a detail level, and we say every asset must have an owner who has to have a single name, so that if there's a problem, we know who's accountable for it. And that accountable person is responsible for providing the management, the control, the support, the safety of that asset. And that's clarified a huge set of doubt and uncertainty around our organisations. The other key role here is the accreditor, and the accreditor is semi-independent in that organisation, but is always the second signature on documents, records, risk assessments and so on, and that person is signing that to say, not that this is right or wrong, but that the process was followed and this was well done. So he's not saying you must take a certain level of risk, but he is saying you must go through a certain process to understand the risk, to get the leaders to accept the risk, to make sure it's been well explained, and then actually transfer it consciously on paperwork or in the records to those people. And that's the difficult conversation, is the one between the information asset owners and the experts, because that's where the understanding has to be built up. So, fortunately, this all used to be tightly controlled document set on how all this works, called IS1 and IS2 calculations and regulations. Because of WikiLeaks, it's now available on the internet, so I encourage you to go and have a look at it. Sometimes these things are very beneficial, and in a strange way, it's become open source and best practice, so that's really quite good. Recent developments. Well, large-scale data losses, often through accident, sometimes through outsourcing, because when you outsource something, you sign service level agreement, you agree to a price, and any supplier is going to try to be more efficient. And being more efficient sometimes means cutting corners, taking shortcuts, not providing quite the right level of training and so on, and that's why the supervision and audit of those contracts is so essential. Sometimes a person pulls a set of prisoner records onto a USB stick and then loses it. Actually, that should never happen. We've seen the aggregation of data increase a lot of the problems for us. The power of laptops, we've seen people able in HR and administrative defence to download all applicants to our naval service onto a laptop, complete set of records, take it home over the weekend to work on it, and then have that car broken into on the drive, and the laptop stolen. All of that is totally understandable, but actually it's also unforgivable. It's completely wrong. And certainly when I was a DSO, if somebody came to me and said, "Oh, my laptop was stolen because a burglar came into my house over the weekend. Oh, it's not my fault," I would say to them, if the burglar had to cut a radiator off the wall and break the piping to take the chain off that the laptop was coupled to the wall with, I have sympathy. If he just took it out of your study or your living room, I have no sympathy. So, we talked about the accreditation process. That's carried out annually for all assets. All information asset owners will be involved in that. Often that's just to say, nothing's changed, the risks remain the same, we're happy. But it's a conscious process. It's also carried out if there's a major change to a system or a major change to the threat or the risk appetite that remains from that. But we do have records now and a process to go through that shows that this is well done. And that's quite important because at a unit or an organisational level, it's very important to be able to consolidate all of these risks. Because you might say, well, each risk on its own seems sensible, but when we add them all together, it's too big. So we need to reduce them somehow to get to an acceptable level. And at least now we have the currency, the words for a dialogue, the process that we can go through to actually get people more comfortable with these things. And when I used to work for the Home Secretary in the UK, she used to say to me, your ID card system, is it secure or not secure? I don't understand. And I'd have to say to her, a Minister of State, it's a bad question. But nothing is secure. Nothing is totally insecure. But we need to find a way of setting your risk appetite, and then I can work with you to deliver it. So, working with partners in this, particularly in the outsourcing field, is very important. We use a thing called the Security Aspects Letter, and that's really the contract in security terms between the supplier and the customer that says, you will do these things, we have the right of audit, and that's how we sort out how the thing will actually work between us. Importantly, that will cover cyber, physical and personnel security. Because there is a danger, and maybe we've come a little close to it this morning, of thinking that cyber is something different to classical security, whereas many of the mitigations and controls to a cyber problem are physical or personnel security. And you've got to make all three components work at the same time to have a viable solution. Incidents are where these things are really tested. We talked a little bit this morning about certs, incident response and so on, but we also put a heavy emphasis on forensics. Because it's one thing to recover from an incident, but the other half of that is, how did this happen in the first place? How can we reduce the chance of it happening? Cybersecurity strategies. The first time we've been able to get together our military, intelligence, commercial and other government departments into a unified approach. And you can get this online, it's quite easy to find. The one thing I would just draw your attention to is for the first time we've been very conscious here in saying cybersecurity isn't just about protecting things. It is about stimulating the economic health of the country and providing an infrastructure and a place that's good to work in, good to live in, and good to invest in. And I think up until this moment, nobody saw cybersecurity as a positive thing. They saw it as an overhead, a cost, a problem, a barrier. But for the first time now we see, and we're saying very strongly, this can lead to new business. This can lead to new investment. This can stimulate growth. And we need that. So, thank you for your attention. We'll talk again later in the day. I was asked to try and produce a case study for you today. Now, as you'll all appreciate, a case study in this area is actually very difficult because any real case study will involve sensitive information, things we don't really want to reveal for lots of different reasons. So, what I've done here is construct a composite case study. So all of the elements of this are true and have happened at different points in time and are real. But I've combined them in such a way that I've created effectively a new case study that isn't traceable to any real company or any real person, but all of the things we'll talk about have actually happened. So, my own views echo Richard's views very closely. I think security is too often seen as the people who like to say no. And in a modern world, we've got to find a way of being able to say yes, or at least being able to say maybe if these conditions, constraints and controls are met. So then we look like people that enable something rather than barriers and things to be defeated and things to be avoided. So, our case study is based on a real project. I've changed it, as I've said, to protect various elements of the information, both the operational methods and the identities of the organisations involved. But think of a sensitive defence organisation. So this is a defence organisation that was historically part of government, but became privatised, then needed to save costs and overhead, become more efficient. And part of the method to do that was working with a long-term outsourced partner at a midpoint in the contract to move much of the processing offshore. So we are outside UK national boundaries, potentially to countries that can't entirely be trusted. So can we do that? Can we not do that? We still have the Hollywood dimension working on us here, so you get from the leaders an extreme reaction from some, no, we absolutely can't consider doing this, it's far too dangerous. And from others we get a kind of fictional reaction that says, none of this is real, it's all just a Hollywood story, there are no hackers, nobody's really going to penetrate our data centre on a persistent basis, just get it offshore and save the money and stop complaining. And you get both reactions. The organisation we're talking about, our mythical, fictional organisation, provides research and advice across the entire defence sector, has many sensitive contracts and relationships, is a key existing target for traditional espionage operations and cyber attacks, already outsourced in many areas, but everything inside the UK, so controlled very tightly, staff all vetted for personnel issues and so on, but needs to make more savings. So move the back office to a low-cost labour country where the infrastructure just can't be trusted or controlled in the same way. So, issues. We use the process we talked about earlier, the IS1, IS2 process, to establish threats, controls and mitigations and residual risks. So now we're having a logical conversation, not a Hollywood conversation about whether to do it. When we look at the sensitivity assets affected, the people who want to do this say, hey, you know, it's no risk. These are all low-grade assets, they're very minor record sets, there's a few privacy problems with it, but we can deal with those. So the concept, move offshore, no classified state secrets at all, so that's not an issue. Low-grade material, human resource, basic records, personnel records. Let's move travel expense fulfillment offshore, that's time-consuming, labour-intensive, privacy sensitive, but nothing else. Let's move the purchase order offshore, that's just a fulfillment thing, again it's not that sensitive. Let's move order fulfillment and generation offshore and payment to suppliers. So fairly mundane stuff, fairly routine. So the case was made that there are some risks to privacy, there's no classified material or state secrets, that's not a huge problem. The bulk data sets will be protected, no copying in this third-party country, no transport in the country, so we'll protect those. We'll up the vetting level of the staff working in those overseas data centres. We'll control the physical security to a higher level, so contract supply chain will be controlled and vetted, and we'll put extra monitoring in. So this looks fine. And the reason it looks fine is that people proposing it don't understand the real threat and the real risk. They think the risk is about stealing some names and addresses off an expenses form. That's not the real risk. These are the real risks. The assumptions are wrong because the assumptions assume the threats are coming from the wrong threat actors or threat sources. So the threats are not individuals, petty criminals and low-grade threat actors. And the threats are not opportunistic and they're not random. So we take a look at the new approach and we get the leadership in a conversation and say, for the first time we're going to reveal the real threats and the real reasons we're worried about this. And they're not about people stealing a few records. So security's role here is to educate and raise the awareness of the leadership so they can understand the threats that are actually out there and why we actually have concern, and then we can produce some real controls to deal with it. The real threats. I'll give you a couple of examples. Remember, sensitive defence organisation with many sensitive relationships, so high-grade target. The real threats are from foreign intelligence services, organised crime, and anarchist groups with high levels of support and technical training. It's a great target for them, highly motivated, highly capable. They will invest over months and years to get inside these databases. Now the leaders would say, why? Because there's no secrets in there. But that's because they don't understand how to take low-grade data and turn it into a secret. And so, let's look at the purchase order ledger moving offshore. So what I would do as a threat source here is to say, purchase orders, okay, so I can use open source material to find when orders are placed by big customers overseas, because you announce it in the press. It's important for the share price, you're going to want to talk about it. So I know the timing. Then I penetrate the purchase order ledger persistently without being found, because that's the important part of it. So I don't want to cause disruption, I want to steal the information over a long period. And then I can reverse engineer the purchase orders against individual contracts, and I can build up a knowledge of the size of the defences on particular websites and particular web servers for sensitive organisations. And then I know the level of attack that will succeed and the level of attack that will fail before I commence the attack. So I'm in a much stronger position than previously. Second threat example, and this is a blended threat because this deals with human attack as well as a cyber attack. So here, again, similarly capable threat sources who want to identify personnel for corruption targets, for coercion targets. Now, what they do is, they go into the HR and travel expenses database, now moved offshore, protected not so well anymore. It's not got any sensitive information in it. It's open source to identify the timing of key contracts placed in the company. And I go back in time in the travel expenses database, and I get a long list of people who've travelled to the target countries. So they could have been involved in the negotiations. Then I use other details in the HR database and various other databases to work out a short list of targets. Then I go to the HR database and I'm looking now for people whose need would be greater than average for money. Large families, some history, a divorce, could be all kinds of things. Now I'm trying to take a short list down to a long list down to a short list. Once I've got my short list, I go back to the travel expenses database, which is all very low-grade information. I want to look for restaurant and bar bills. So I want to find somebody who makes a 3-week trip to a target country. In the middle weekend, they get lonely and homesick. They have a couple of bottles of wine with their friends. I can see which restaurants they use, which bars they use, how much they drink, everything. So I know when, where, and what approach to make. And all I've used is open source, very, very low-grade information. Now, when you explain that threat to a leader in that way, with the operational details, they suddenly change their views. And the Hollywood effect falls away, and they say, we can't do it. Oh, we can't make the savings. But that's where security has to step in to enable the business to operate. And so, we explain all of this to the leaders, and they suddenly understand the real threat for the first time. But then, like a hero, we step out and we say, but there's a solution. Now, sadly, the solution means investment, so you can't make all the savings. But what we do is, we scramble the data before we offshore it. So we take the structure out of it, we take the personnel identifiers out of it, we serial number it. We take out of the purchase order ledger the structure that relates it back to individual orders. So all you see is a random list of orders, and you can't connect them together anymore. You can still fulfill them and do all the paperwork for them in that other country, but you can't get the structure back. And we do a bunch of other stuff that basically makes the data useless. So you can't enrich it anymore in the third country. All you can do is process it, and that's what we want. And the net result is that we can carry on and make the savings. We only make 80% of the savings that were on the table originally. We spend the 20% on an enclave, a secure facility in the UK, that restructures the data after it comes back on shore, makes it valuable again. But suddenly, security is seen as a hero that enabled an 80% saving to be made, not an overhead that said no to a good project and stopped us moving forward. And so, that's the sort of result I would commend to you, is to try and cast security in the role of the helpers for leaders, opening up opportunities for savings, opening up new opportunities for delivering services to citizens, but critically engaging them in that risk appetite conversation, educating, raising awareness, but being the people who finally can say yes. And let's hope that when you do say yes, you're appreciated and I understand the effort that's gone into it. Thank you.
I'm Shukipele, the Head of Information Security for the government in Israel. Actually, what I wanted to do today is to share with you some of the experience of another government organization that exists in a small country. It's not as huge as the UK and the US. Has similar problems to what you may experience here in your country. Share a little bit about the experience and see what kind of challenges you have in the security area and in the e-government activities. A little bit about e-government in Israel. E-government in Israel, I think the same as in Moldova, was built to reduce bureaucracy, to create a better service for the citizens, for the public, and externalize services that usually you need to wait in line for a very long time, make them much more available to the public. It's all about having a 24/7 service, by having increased efficiency, by externalizing the services and making the public, the citizen and the small businesses much more flexible and be able to do business much faster. In e-government in Israel, we are the internet frontier for the government, for the entire public sector. We are providing services for citizens and businesses. Actually, we are the secured ISP and ASP for the government ministries. On top of that, we have the task or the challenge to be the ones that are taking care of cybersecurity and information security. And in order to do that, we are creating a knowledge center in coordinating bodies like CERT, SIM, and threat research. One of the things that is important, and I think this is one of the main pieces of information that I would like you to come out from this presentation, from this session, is about sharing. When we were young, or when we have small children, we teach them how to share. And after a few years, they forget it, and they start competing with each other, and to hold the information very close to their chest and not sharing the information. And in the world of information security and cybersecurity, not sharing information can be disastrous. Of course, we need to know what we share, and we're not just exposing everything to everyone. But if an incident is happening in one place in the world, or if an incident is happening in one organization, it may very shortly appear in another organization. So if we take places like banks or like private sector or public sector, if we are trying to hide or to cope with an incident alone, and we don't share this information, we're actually creating a dangerous situation. We're creating a state that something can then propagate to other organizations, and we could have prevented it only by sharing this information, and I will touch this area immediately. eGov in Israel, I don't really know right now what is the size of eGov here. We may get some information from Stella later on, but we are about 25 employees, people working for eGov in Israel. All of them are high-tech professionals, and part of e-government is, where this is, there should be a pointer here, is fully outsourced or partially outsourced. So keep in mind, we are dealing not only with civil service or government employees, but a lot of the information, a lot of the activity is outsourced and out-tasked. So we are doing software development inside the country, but we are outsourcing it to commercial companies. And we have to take care about making sure that we are receiving, if Richard mentioned the supply chain management, I will touch this later on in one of the examples. The supply chain management is a very important issue here. We need to know who do we work with. E-government is regulated by NISA. NISA is the National Information Security Agency, to make sure, because we are defined as critical infrastructure. The definition of critical infrastructure was done only last year because technology changes. 10 years ago, technology was not critical infrastructure. But the faster we go through this process, the more important it becomes. For that reason, right now we are critical infrastructure. And for this reason also, all e-government employees are having some kind of security clearance, depending on what kind of activity they can do. Let me focus on this chart for a second. Get this thing working. Yuri, can you help me with that, please? This is a general structure of how e-government is existing in Israel. This is us. This is e-government facilities. We have one leg in the government network and one leg in the internet. We connect to all the ministries. Each building here is a ministry on its own. Let's say Ministry of Agriculture, Transportation, Tourism. We connect also to the citizens and to the businesses. And we have different facilities and different tasks. If employees in the ministry want to access the internet, they go through us, through all our security systems. So we provide clean internet to the government. It means that we check everything that goes through our facilities. On the other hand, when a citizen or a business wants to access an office in the ministry, they only access what the ministry is placing externally on the website. Each ministry still has their own chief information officer, chief security officer, and their IT infrastructure. But they will put the public website, the public information in e-government. So what happens is that the businesses and citizens are accessing the copy that we have here. There are two types of services that we provide. We provide standard websites for the offices, but we also provide a website that will allow to do some interactive activity. For example, you want to renew your driver's license. And when you want to renew your driver's license, you go to the website of the Ministry of Transportation. Some information is checked against the Ministry of Transportation. Another piece, your ID number, is checked against the Ministry of Internal Affairs. And then you are going to be sent to another website to do the payment. So this is a complex workflow that we support here. Now, keep in mind that we are here on this border. We don't interfere with what's going on in the ministries, and we definitely don't interfere with what's going on in the citizens, businesses, or private citizens. I will run very shortly on this slide, let it develop in the background. This is actually the roadmap that we went through the last 14 or 15 years. And the more advanced we are, let's say we started as an ISP only, but now we are moving towards online services, government information, standards, which is very important. And we developed standards that include inherently security features. We created a standard called GovX, which means if you want to start a new website for a ministry, you have a platform, you have a framework to build a new website. This framework includes also inherent security features. We are moving towards services that are online and also in almost real time. For example, import and export that is done right now in Israel relies on a system that we are hosting. If this system does not work, import and export ceases to work for at least a certain time. And the last thing that we are doing right now is personalizing information. We're going to provide personalized information for Israeli citizens. So you can access your personal part of the government portal and know how many traffic points you have, or when you need to renew your passport, or what you pay your taxes on time. Of course, this requires very good authentication and authorization. And this is the challenge that we have here. And again, the more we go towards the advanced services, the more we are dependent on technology, and the more we are in problems if we have cyber issues. What are the main threats that we are trying to defend against, and some examples of what happened in the last few years? The first two ones, the defacement and the denial of service, are the most annoying one. And this is because they present a clear and present danger. It's not the most dangerous thing that we can experience, but this is something that we need to address now and immediately. Otherwise, we're going to be in the breaking news on all channels. Because if your site is defaced, everyone knows it in 30 seconds. This is what happened for the Bank of Israel in April 2008. They had their website hosted, outsourced to a different company. site was defaced. It was defaced by a group of Moroccan hackers, and there was only just a Moroccan flag or something in Arabic presented on the site. Not a major damage, but it was outsourced. It was placed and hosted in a very unsecured location. They came to e-government at that time to try to solve the problem. What we did at that time is first of all try to do some forensic work to make sure that all the events, all the malware is outside. There's no more malware on the site. We brought it into the e-government facilities, kind of quarantined it. It's still quarantined today because we really don't know how deep the hackers went at that site. And now it is hosted in the facilities of the government of Israel. But this is one piece of this is an event that happened because the supply chain management was not checked properly. They outsourced that piece of software to another company without really checking what are their capabilities. Another type of attack is the denial of service attacks, which usually take place at the same time when political events are happening. This is a very good example. In 2009, there was a military operation in Gaza. It was called Cast Leg. At the same time, we experienced thousands and hundreds of thousands of attempts to bring down e-government services. You could clearly see on the graph that we present the military activity that was going on in the field at that time. The number of attacks was very obvious. And in this case, it even brought down services for a few minutes up to an hour. But this is something very unique. It usually happens when you have some major political events. Other events like theft, corruption of data, and stealing of money can also happen, but these are investigated much later. A lot of forensic is involved in this to find out exactly what happened, and the reaction is not immediate, as you would see with defacements and denial of services, because it takes much more investigation to do later on. But many of the threats or many of the activities start as defacements or denial of services. A defacement can be a gateway to putting something much more dangerous into the system. What do we do to try to protect and maintain security of the systems? We are following a very strict guidelines of the separation of duties and segregation of networks. We are logging everything that goes through the system, so we can investigate later what was taking place at the time, even if it happens a few hours or a few days later. We let through only what we can monitor. We will not pass through our systems any traffic that we cannot monitor and check for malware. The monitoring that we do is only for security reasons. We are not doing any content monitoring. We monitor for security, for malware, and for code, malicious code. We do not allow remote administration. If someone needs to make major changes in their system, they have to come on site and do it on site. And one of the other important things, we implemented secure development lifecycle. We do security reviews, we do code investigation and code reviews, and of course we do penetration testing to every system, every application before it comes alive online in our systems. We do it by using two bodies. We have the Information Security Organization, which is running the CERT and actually providing the guidelines and the directions to the information infrastructure, and the implementation is done by the infrastructure department. The infrastructure unit is responsible for the first response, for hardening the systems, and for implementing software like antiviruses, anti-spywares, and so on. Another very important thing is the issue of regulation. As a government entity, we are regulated also by different organizations. I will point out some of them. We have the National Cyber Bureau, a new organization that is supposed to take care and regulate cyber issues across the country on a national level. We're implementing standards, ISO 27001 and PCI, because we are a clearinghouse for the e-payment system for billions of Israeli shekels every year, so we certify that system to PCI standard. We have the government CIO that is going to regulate all ministries and all offices to be on the same page regarding security and ICT and standards and technologies. As I mentioned, we are guided by NISA because we are a critical infrastructure, and a very important part is the Ministry of Justice. We have an organization called UNITA, and they are creating the privacy regulations. By creating privacy regulations, they are also creating standards and guidelines that if you implement them, you are actually gaining more security in other aspects also, not only privacy. So this organization in the Justice Department is giving guidelines to the private sector initially. And of course, we work with the National Institute of Standards. Cooperation, I mentioned sharing is very important. We do cooperations with almost all the organizations that are dealing with cybersecurity and information security. Again, it's defense, it's the National Cyber Bureau, it's technology company, the Israeli CERT and foreign CERTs, and we work also with the universities and government enterprises. Let's skip this one. Israel is member of the first organization, which is an organization that includes a large number of CERTs worldwide. I think it covers something like 160 CERT organizations in 60 countries. It is very important because through this organization we can transfer the information and receive information regarding cyber attacks and cyber events worldwide. And I wanted to share with you a blueprint, a concept that we are going to right now. Again, not all of it is implemented at the moment, but this is going to be the roadmap that we are going to implement. We see the CERT organization as a high-level national CERT that oversees and looks and knows what is going on in the entire country. We can find a few sectoral CERTs. There is the government CERT, the academy, private sector, financial sector, critical infrastructure, and defense. Each one is going to have a CERT of their own, and each one of them is responsible for the activities in different organizations. For example, the government will be responsible for e-government, for government offices, and for the public sector. The academy is going to oversee universities and colleges, and so on. But now, what is important in this area is the alerts. Each organization needs to give alerts to the CERT or to the organization above it. Not all of the alerts are the same, not all the information is the same, but it's very important that if something is happening, someone else will know it. And between CERT, we're going to share data and share information. Be sure about one thing, we're not going to provide the raw data to anyone, but we need to work the information to see what we can share and make sure that others knows what is going on in our organization. And as a response for that, we're going to get procedures, guidelines, and immediate actions are going to be sent down from the national CERT to the central CERTs, and then again, once again, to the organizations themselves. So this is the way we're going to share information and to propagate the instructions and the guidelines and make sure that everyone in the country is on the same page regarding the security level and the response that is necessary. We started in e-government about 14, 15 years ago as an information security group, doing standard information security. Today we are working on preventing malicious code, preventing and doing some internet monitoring, and we are moving on into the area of cybersecurity, where everything is connected. The impact of doing a successful cyber attack on a government body is very visible. It creates chaos. It can create chaos. It can create fear uncertainty in the public. So we need to make sure that the public is aware of what is going on. They know that there are organizations that are taking care of it and are doing the action necessary to bring things into order again. That's it. Thank you very much.
My name is Hannes Astok, and happy to see everybody. We have been working here with the e-Governance Academy almost 2 years already, and we are happy to be back again. So I'm happy now to introduce you a little bit what I do in Estonia, and okay, good. The background definitely why we need good policy framework for the topic is pretty clear. Growing threats, security concerns, what we explained earlier already. There is a real vulnerability of the critical information system, need for coordinated activities, clear roles and responsibilities, and better protection of information systems and critical infrastructure. And this became clear also for Estonia in 2007, when we started to develop our Estonian cybersecurity strategy for 2008-2013. This means that we are now starting the process for the next version. This strategy is available in English online. Just put the name on Google and you will see it. So there is 5 goals in this strategy, and they are very similar to what was presented by our colleagues from UK and from US, from Israel. It's a clear task that we need to develop a large-scale system of information security measures. It cannot be in the way that we just do it in the level of a very central organization. It must be covering almost all public sector organizations, and definitely must cover also private sector organizations. So, but as this strategy is mainly connected to the government activities, it's talking about public institutions. Definitely the second task is increasing competence on cybersecurity. So this means that there must be in every institution proper knowledge about the activities, how to protect your systems, what is cybersecurity, how to implement. And not only in the level of technical guys, what is also definitely a very important part, but also on the level of the top managers. Because if the top managers do not understand the topic, technical guys do not have resources, or this pretty simple connection. So there must be a clear understanding in the all level of in the organizations why we need it, why we need to work with it, why we need to use the resources for it, why we need to do it. Also, there must be definitely a proper legal framework to support the activities, because as you know, in government, nobody moves before there is no clear legal background. Well, this is not a problem of Estonia. I think it's in every government. There is a lot of officials, many lawyers who say that we don't need to do it because it's not written in the regulations. So, but I think if in cybersecurity we will wait for regulations, we are killed already, both technically and probably also physically. And definitely we need to have a very good international cooperation, because in this kind of treats, it's absolutely clear that if we have a proper international cooperation, we know much better what will happen tomorrow. The cyber attacks, cyber threats are going country by country, and there must be very clear understanding what's happening today in Israel, probably it happens tomorrow in Estonia, or happens already yesterday in US. It's very similar, the trends are very similar, but there must be clear knowledge sharing and information sharing between the countries. And the last point, but not the less important, is raising awareness about the cybersecurity, not only for the government officials, but also in the society as general, in the businesses, but also as a private citizens. how we protect our data, how we protect our identity, what we are allowed to do our kids in the internet, what we are doing there actually, either what we are allowing or not, but what we are actually doing there. Are we posting videos being anonymous, wearing this e-folks messages, or what we do down there? So it's a very multi-level set of activities what must be implemented. There is just a short list of about the relations, what with cybersecurity strategy in Estonia, having connections to another governmental policies and strategies. Information security interoperability, information societies development strategy, knowledge-based Estonia, criminal policy development, education and health development plans, and probably much more. Also, if you ask, is there any kind of international law is existing? Almost not. But it's just, at least at this point when we started to develop our strategy, there was just a convention of cybercrime from Council of Europe, not that much more. As the topic is fastly developing, it's very hard to provide kind of international legislation about it. So it's mainly everybody must do something by himself in the legislation, but definitely cooperate with other countries active in the field. Also, there are a couple of EU legal acts about it, so, but not that much directly connected. It's the topics what are indirectly connected to it, not how you protect your data or how you protect yourself about the cyber attacks. It's more about little bit other topics, but definitely connected very much. And also there is, in national legal acts, a lot of topics what must be connected to it, especially in penal code and also in Electronic Communications Act. Something in Personal Data Protection Act, what is very important, and also in the Public Information Act. And there is national legislation about the Information Society Services Act. What is pretty important in the sense that this limits the liability of internet service providers for the content of services. So this is a big discussion also in European Union, that should it be that internet services provider are also responsible for content of internet? What is a very tricky question, and goes down very deeply for the question of freedom of internet. So is it the content and channel are separated or not? So this is what is a huge debate also worldwide now, and pop up probably in very extreme measures in the Doha meeting of ITU after a couple of months in Doha. Also, UN is a little bit, I can say, more and more active in this topic. So there is the Internet Governance Forum and definitely the International Telecommunication Union. So they also can provide you some support in this kind of guidelines. And in European Union, there is also working groups working under the European Commission, and also European Networking Information Security Agency under the European Commission is providing their support to EU member states, but definitely not only for the member states. And there is also running an European program for critical infrastructure protection, so it's also EU research activities connected to it. Okay, but the question is now, okay, we have proper strategy, well describing risks, probably describing somehow what should be the cooperation, but the question is what you do in the level of institution. You can have a nice strategy, but this doesn't help you in your daily activities. How you implement the measures in the level of one institution, one ministry, one agency, how you do it, how it will be coordinated, how you can be sure that you are doing the right things, and how your government can be sure that you are doing the right things. So we developed 3-level baseline security system for the information system, what is compulsory for every government institutions, for every ministry, every agency, every municipality. Just a general picture, what about we are talking? Definitely the definition of information security is pretty wide. So we take it in a way that it should ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data assets. So it must be covering all those topics pretty widely, all those three components. And just to remind you what about we are talking, the data availability means that data is available, so it means that channels are open and right people can use the channel, or right machines actually can use the channel, or citizens can use the channel. Also there is very big question of data integrity. So this means, what is also a very critical question. This means that is the data exactly this data what you are thinking it is, or as you have created it. And if we were talking about data availability, this is, I should say, the easiest process. If it's taking down, you do not have a connection, okay, you re-establish the connection, and this is done. If somebody is changing your data in the database, how you can be sure afterwards that your data you are providing as a government is correct? If somebody is changing my personal identity number, how I can afterwards be sure that the government accepting me as the same person? Or if somebody is changing my whatever data what is connected to the government, if somebody is changing that it's now compulsory for me to go to a military service, I'm disabled, probably government start to hunt me and asking, Hannes, why you didn't attend the military service right now? Maybe I do not have one leg and one head. So it might cause huge problems for the citizens, for the companies, or if somebody is intervening to the tax authority systems and changing my tax data, this can mean that I should pay, I don't know how many 100,000 euros for the tax, what I'm not actually obliged to do. Or much better, somebody is deleting my tax, what I should pay for government. So this is a very important question, that we should be sure that nobody is changing our data and data is correct. And the third thing is data confidentiality. So this means that we must be sure that only those persons or only those machines who are authorized to use this data can do it. Nobody else. And this is also a very complex question, definitely what we need to take into account. So what is the system what we developed? Is the three-level baseline system for the information systems. It's called ISKE in Estonian, which doesn't mean nothing. But the system must be implemented in every governmental agency, ministry, and also municipality. It's based on the German document, IT Grundschutz in German, what is 1,000 measures, what every institution should implement. 1,000 measures. We make it short, 256. This means that, telling you honestly, too heavy. Might be suitable, our system might be suitable for the Ministry of Defense, for the Ministry of Finance, okay, for the ministries. But in Estonia we have over 100 municipalities who have less than 7 people working in their office. So if you like to implement this kind of measures in their offices, you must hire 2 more people. What is mission impossible? So actually now we are working about a light version of it also. Because otherwise you are getting into a situation that if really somebody, a small municipality must implement this kind of system, they just don't do anything. But if you provide them an opportunity to do something, a light version, at least all necessary small steps, they definitely do it. But if you tell them that all 256 measures should be implemented during 1 year, they just do not communicate with you anymore. So, okay. So in this system we have three different set of security measures for three different requirements. And just to show you here, it's both about, it's in Estonian, integrity, availability, and confidentiality. And every institution must evaluate himself about every database, what he have, what kind of level it is. And it's also three levels. 1, not critical, 2, important, 3, extremely critical. And both in the view of availability, integrity, and confidentiality. So probably if there is a database of, let's say, database of press releases of a ministry, it probably, by availability, it might be important, but it's not critical. About integrity, it's also important, but not critical, but even maybe not that critical. And by confidentiality, it's even 0 because nobody, it must be public. So this means that you evaluate every level, and relatively, when you get use marks like the database of legal acts of city of Tallinn, what is capital city, probably their database is about the availability is level 2, important, about integrity is probably level 2 also, but might be level 3, and by confidentiality it's level 1, means public. So accordingly, you develop also your technical and organizational measures. What I like to underline that this system is not focusing on technical measures. It's focusing definitely on technical measures, but this is only one part of it. Information system protection activities are also about human resources and about the technical environment around it. So this means that, as described already today, there are definitely risks of cyber attack, that somebody is stealing your data, going online to your database. But the main risk is that somebody just leaving the computer open in the evening, and somebody is jumping into your office, there is nobody in, and just copying this database or sending via internet to someone. I just yesterday read from a newspaper, Financial Times, there was a supplement about ICT development, and there was a study made by an American company. What they did, they just threw in the street memory sticks next to some government office. And what turned out? That 70% of those memory sticks were put into the governmental computers, either it's strictly prohibited, and people start to learn what is in the memory stick. Even more. In those memory sticks, in what was printed official logo of US government, 90% of them were put to the computer. So you can imagine that if you put this kind of unknown memory stick into your computer, what looks like nice, and probably your printer 8 gigabytes, so everybody starts to use it immediately. But definitely it's one of the easiest way to influence your computer with whatever virus you like. So it's very easy. Also, there are a lot of technical risks connected to the availability of data or confidentiality. So what are how your risks are covered about the electricity supply to your data center? It's a typical question that it's just in one incoming electricity line. Or where you keep your security copies of your databases. Yes, you're doing it properly. Every night you do a security copy on the tape. But if you just keep it in the next room of your computer, probably when there's a fire in your data center, it's all gone. It must be probably at least in the next building, but in another city. So the measures are often not that much about the digital technical solutions. It's much more about the organization. Very typical questions also. Definitely, if a new person is coming to your organization, yes, you provide him rights to access to the databases what is normal workflow, because he or she, when he's coming, he or she must have access to information. And it's probably proper regulated and everything is okay. But when this person is leaving your office, do you cut till the same moment his right to access to the databases? Maybe, but not necessarily. This is what we forget often. And when you fire him, probably he's angry about you. And he's trying to do everything to make your life afterwards unpleasant. So these are very typical situations, what can be covered just to routine organizational activities. Access to the office premises. Can everybody jump in? Do you allow visitors to come to your office? Do you leave them alone there when you're going out to have a cup of coffee? Do you know them? Do you register them? So there is endless number of questions what must be answered, but they are not complicated questions. You just need to think about it. And as described in the British presentation, there must be somebody who is responsible for it. How you say that it's risk management officer?
Information asset owners and senior information risk owner.
Senior risk owner, yeah. And probably this is the post nobody wants to have it. I will pay properly. So he will be sued afterwards if something is wrong. But this is also a question in this system that in every organization there must be somebody who is responsible for the complex view. Otherwise, somebody is taking care that the doors are closed, but there can be some leaks. Somebody just described me a situation in one developing country. There was somebody very proud in the data center showing that how we did the data center, but the person was asking that your data center door in the 5th floor is open just. The guy says, no, this is not a problem because we have security in the 1st floor. The person said, no, but I was jumping in and nobody asking me. Because the regulations downstairs were changed already. But in the data center we didn't know about it. So it's a complex measure again, but it must be a complex view of it. So it's not an easy task, because it really demands very focused attention from the top management, from the persons who are implementing it, and the support from the top management is critical, because you cannot make changes in your organization if you do not have support from the top management. If your minister or secretary general do not understand the topic, you will never get finances, you will never get to be somebody's task. And probably it will be one day somebody's task after everything is going down and you are facing a critical data loss or disruption of a service or whatever, and afterwards everybody will start that, oh, are we so bad? Why we didn't do it earlier? This can be also one scenario. But sometimes it even helps. Hopefully not in your organization. Just if it's happening in the organization next to you, probably you'll learn about it. This is just to remind you that also terms and conditions of the system are approved by the government of Estonia, so this means that it must be government-wide. So that's it. I hope you good luck in this process. I understand you're now a little bit disappointed what is behind you, but don't worry. It will be a funny process. Thank you.